Well, hello again. Welcome into Strategies for a Living here on 101.7 FM and 710 KEEL. I'm marriage and family therapist David McMillan, and look at there's Rapid Ruben Wright, the ace of the airwaves.
Good evening, everybody.
And, I don't know if you've heard from Carla today. She's still doing grandmom duty.
That's right. That is absolutely right. Double grandma duty. From
Double,
what I hear.
double grandma duty. Everybody is doing well and healthy.
Excellent.
And, it takes a lot to when Carla has to be out, it takes a lot to sub for her.
Yeah, it's a lot of weight to carry.
It is a lot of weight to carry, but man, we've done it today. We've got a best-selling author that is going to be our co-host and life strategist all at the same time. Remember, we talked to Sherry Cormier last week, a couple of weeks ago, I guess, the author of Sweet Sorrow. I don't know if you remember, but we referenced, Sherry referenced in that book, we talked about it that night, something called Friday's Laws.
I think I do remember that.
Yeah. And so we're going to talk about that and more today with Sherry Cormier. She is our co-host as well as life strategist. So we're all looking forward to that.
I am ready to go.
Folks, thank you for tuning in to Strategies for a Living. We are presented, of course, by CADA, the Council on Alcoholism and Drug Abuse of Northwest Louisiana. Been helping individuals and families now for 60 years. We're also brought to you by Jerry Anderson State Farm Insurance, by Learning RX, by Highland Place Rehab and Nursing Center, by Jacob's Well Inspirational Books and Gifts, and by Resilient House. Back in a moment, we'll meet Sherry Cormier, author of Sweet Sorrow, and talk about Friday's Laws.
Love me twice today.
Welcome back into 101.7 FM and 710 KEEL. Welcome back into Strategies for a Living. I'm marriage and family therapist David McMillan. Let's welcome back to the program now Dr. Sherry Cormier. She is the author of Sweet Sorrow, Finding Enduring Wholeness After Loss and Grief. She is a psychologist and consultant who engages in public speaking and training and grief mentoring. She is a former professor at both the University of Tennessee and West Virginia University. She holds a bachelor's degree from Kansas State University, and both her master's and doctoral degrees are from Purdue University. She's the author of Counseling Strategies and Interventions for Professional Helpers and the co-author of Interviewing and Change Strategies for Helpers, and co-writer and co-producer of over 50 training videos. And I am just delighted to welcome back Dr. Sherry Cormier to Strategies for Living. Dr. Cormier, welcome back.
Well, David, I'm delighted to be back.
Thank you for doing double duty today as both co-host. You got big shoes to fill.
I gathered that from the beginning. That's not pressure or anything, is it?
No pressure, Sherry. No pressure.
I know.
You can
joking.
do it. You can do it. Of course, I think you're gonna. We decided when you were on. What were you on? A week ago? 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, maybe 10 days ago, roughly.
We decided that a couple of things. That number one, you're going to come back several times because your book, Sweet Sorrow, is so packed full of many things that we need to be talking about, and indeed do talk about here on Strategies for Living. I think you've hit a chord. So this is the first of many times, Sherry, that I'm sure you're going to be with us. Thank you for doing that on short notice today.
Hey, it's great. I'm so delighted to be here, and I'm wishing Carla well with those twin grandbabies. I'm kind of envious.
Absolutely. You mentioned In Sweet Sorrow, and and I told you that
about Friday's Law.
Friday's Laws. You got my attention early in the beginning of the book because I think before in the first 15 pages or so of the book, within the first 15 pages, you had mentioned discovering Friday's Laws, and it's a book that Dr. Paul Friday, who is from he got his doctoral degree from the University of Pittsburgh, and lives in Southwest Pennsylvania, and practices. He's been the chief of clinical psychology, I think, at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, Shady Side.
For many years.
Yeah. So. And he wrote this book, Friday's Laws. I interviewed him several years ago.
I think that's an incredible synchronicity.
Amen. And so many times, I think I may have mentioned to you, Sherry, I don't remember now whether it was on or off the air, but I referenced this last night with our life strategist. I wrote a column several years ago titled, I've had far too many coincidences in my life to believe in coincidences.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Me too.
So,
Me too.
Yeah, you too, big time. Underscore and exclamation point. At any rate, Friday's Laws is just so, it's a combination of, what would you say, common sense and...
that's such a good question. Partly common sense. Right?
Right.
Some common sense guidelines. And his, he developed these. Dr. Friday developed these, David, after something like over 50,000 hours with patients.
Yeah, a lot of time in the therapy room.
So. A lot of common sense, but a lot of this emerged and it's a list. Friday's Laws is a list of 8 things, and after just talking and listening to so many people over a period of a long time, he kind of pulled out all of these sort of important precepts.
Yes. I love the subtitle of the book.
I was just going to mention that to you.
How to become normal when you're not, and how to stay normal when you are.
Yeah, because it's a sort of a double-edged sword there, right? It's sort of like Well, you might not be normal, and you could be, but the other side of it is, what if you are normal, but you couldn't be,
Yeah, yeah.
or could lose it?
Yeah, well, and isn't that the case? Isn't that the tightrope that we walk in this life? He says normal people have crazy ideas. Crazy people have crazy ideas. Normal people know a little quicker when their crazy ideas are crazy. Crazy people are convinced that their crazy ideas are normal.
Right?
I love it. I love it.
And it's pretty hard when you're talking with someone who's thinking crazy but believes it's not crazy. It's pretty hard to convince them otherwise.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, you know, one of the reasons that I reached out to you today, I told you, Dr. Cormier, that I may need a therapist to get through this.
Yeah, you did.
One of the things, his first law is life is difficult.
Yeah.
And
it's supposed to be difficult, in fact.
yeah. And he talks about, he talks about what's normal, and what's not. He actually he begins with a story about memory that was told to him by his wife's uncle Wilbur. It seems there were these three men, a physician, a lawyer, and a psychologist, who were bragging to each other about their high recall and memory functions.
Yeah.
My memory is so good, claimed the physician, that I can remember my mother changing my diaper. That's nothing, declared the lawyer with a certain degree of superior indignation. My memory is so good, I've just hired a colleague to represent me. You see, I distinctly remember on the day I was born, my mother's obstetrician slapping me. I'm suing him for assault and battery. Well, declared the psychologist, my memory is so good, I can remember going to a dance with my father and coming home with my mother.
My mother. Yes. I reread that today, too.
I love it. So he talks about, and this is something I haven't seen, Sherry, anyplace else.
Nor have I. I know where you're going with this.
He
Dave.
talked about the day, he talks about the day of conception.
Yeah.
So he says, prior to the moment when you were conceived, you had perceptual non-existence. For the eons prior to that date of your conception, there was no sensation, no time, no space. Perhaps we're all in a fourth, fifth, or sixth dimension. There was no black, no white, no gray. There was no solid, liquid, nor gas. There was nothingness. On the momentous day of your conception, at that spectacular moment, one of the millions of sperm in your father's ejaculate burrowed itself in through nature's protective lining deep into the one egg that your mother's ovaries released during that particular 28-day cycle, and your body began to be. Now, that's miraculous, just if you stop and think about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But then he goes on to kind of challenge us to calculate our own date of conception. He asks the question, when were you conceived? And he gives a table, a couple of tables in the book to help us figure that out.
Mm-hmm.
And he introduces something he calls the period of awe. It quotes from Stephen Mitchell, the Book of Job. Why did you let me be born? Why couldn't I have stayed in the deep waters of the womb, rocked to sleep in the dark?
Yes, because after I'm born, life, we know the first law. Life is difficult.
Life is difficult. And so he says the next 8 to 9 weeks of your existence after that date of conception were explosive in their intensity and wonderment. However, these first 2 months are not the point of discussion for his book. approximately 2 months after your conception, an initiation of conditioned wonder began, and this is called the period of awe, and you calculate it. But back to the date of conception, and here's where I may need a therapist, Sherry. I had not
Okay.
done this before. I mean, I'd gotten the book in years ago when I interviewed Dr. Friday. I
Yes.
guess I looked at it. I remember seeing it, and I went,
Yes.
and I didn't think much about it, until today. I was preparing for this
For tonight.
tonight,
Yeah.
and I plugged things in. So my birth date, November the 15th, 1956, and then I add 3 months, so December, January, February 15th, and then your date of conception, you subtract 1 year, and then I realized, wait a minute, February the 14th, 15th, 1955. The date of conception. I never knew that I was conceived likely Valentine's Day,
Yes. Your
19
parents were having a lot of fun that day, I think.
1955.
I thought you were going to say about 4 months before your parents got married. I had a friend find out that way too.
Parents got married.
Well, that
I
could.
just know that on Valentine's Day they were having a lot of fun that year.
I love it, and what it just rocks me to think of, being conceived, whether it was that day or whether it was around that time, the next day, or whatever, just to be, to come into existence, to start that period of awe, uh, you know,
and be conceived on Valentine's Day, which, is a day of love, of remembering love, of
yeah, and
passion.
and pure love. I love it.
Right?
Sherry Cormier, the author of Sweet Sorrow, we're talking about Friday's Laws from Dr. Paul Friday today. We'll talk about more Reuben Scott. You're doing it again. You're doing it to me. I love it. We'll be back. More strategies with Sherry Cormier to come. Reuben, too.
Proven too.
Can't get enough of your love.
Welcome back. Welcome back into 1017 FM, 710 KEEL. Welcome back into Strategies for Living. Marriage and family therapist David McMillan. Dr. Sherry Cormier is our co-host and life strategist today. She's the author of Sweet Sorrow. It's a great book, folks. You got to go get this book, Finding Enduring Wholeness After Loss and Grief. And Sherry and I are talking about Friday's Laws today. That book is available also wherever you buy books. Great little book, and it's written by Dr. Paul Friday. Shall we, Sherry, run down the 8 laws very quickly, and then we'll pull them apart? So we've mentioned in the first segment here, life is difficult. The second law is perception is reality. The third law is change is the toughest thing a human being can do. The fourth law is you can never change another human being. You can only change yourself. When you change, they change, but you cannot change them. Law number 5 is I'm responsible for everything I do and say. I am not responsible for your response. Law number 6, the future and the past are seldom as good or as bad as we anticipate or remember. Law number 7, no one has a squeaky clean psyche. And last but not least, law number 8, the only thing that lasts forever is now. I love Dr. Friday's Laws, don't you?
I love Dr. Friday's Laws. I've given that, you can go on his website actually now and get bookmarks that have these laws on them.
Yes.
And I've given them to colleagues, I've given them to clients, I've given them to friends who are undergoing tough times. I keep mine posted. Actually, when I got permission from Dr. Friday to put the laws in Sweet Sorrow, he was kind enough to send me a whole cadre of bookmarks and a little plaque with a little easel that I have in my office.
He's a good guy.
He's a really great guy. He's a great guy, and he's helped a lot of people. When I found this book, David, you see, I found this book. I didn't know about his book, Friday's Laws. I didn't know about Friday's Laws or Dr. Friday. But Jay and I, right after Jay was diagnosed, we were diagnosed at our local hospital in Morgantown, West Virginia, where we were living then. We went to the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, or UPMC, which is affiliated with the University of Pittsburgh, to their cancer center called the Hillman, Hillman, Hillman Cancer Center. And we were there initially for almost a day. They were rerunning all kinds of diagnostic tests on Jay. So I was there for a day. Jay was occupied, right? I was just sort of left to my own devices and worried. And so I'm strolling all over the cancer center, and I go in the bookstore. And, of course, again, speaking of no coincidences, I walk into that bookstore, and right in front of me is this book, Friday's Laws. And, Paul J. Friday, Ph.D., and I pick it up, and I realize he's a psychologist here. And then I turn and I read the Friday's Laws, and that last one, the first one, Life is Difficult, that was really hitting home to me that day.
Absolutely.
And then, when someone's been diagnosed with a terminal illness and you read the last one, the only thing that lasts forever is now.
Mm-hmm.
And I so resonated with these. I bought the book. I started reading it. I think I read most of the book that day. And it really, I would always go back to these laws, especially during and after Jay's diagnosis and after he died.
Yes.
I needed to reread them to help me, just what you said earlier about the subtitle, to help me stay normal and not start thinking crazy things.
Right. You know, he makes the point that mental health professionals pick up the struggle of the trip only after patients are well on their way, and we try to figure out how to help people maximize their travels on this womb to tomb excursion that every single one of us is on. But few of us consider the essence of the struggle. How can we re-enter the heaven from where we all came, the womb? And what do we do when we realize that we ultimately can't get there? So a helpful start is this law. Life is to realize life is difficult, not because of sins of omission or commission on our part or the part of others. Rather, life is difficult because it's supposed to be difficult.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's supposed to present hardship.
When everything works right, life will still be difficult.
Difficult.
Yeah. So how we adapt to this struggle becomes the essence of successful living. Then our ability to adapt, the adaptability to the fact that life is difficult.
Really. And, you know, that even moving into that second law about perception is reality.
Yes.
You know, yes, life involves difficulty and hardship. I think our suffering really depends so much, we can make it better or worse. What do you think? On our perception.
Yeah, because
our perspective,
our perceptions, human beings function on those perceptions. It doesn't matter if the perceptions are right or wrong, Dr. Friday says, good or bad, or intelligent or stupid, or crazy or reasonable. Every human who's ever lived has always functioned on what he or she perceived and perceives. And human perceptions are so inherently subjective that each perception is unique to all of human history. And yet, we obtain such comfort and solace when we sense common perceptions with people that we know and trust.
You know, it makes me think of you were talking about the story he wrote about. It makes me think of a story about a family that only had one horse and one son.
Yeah. Can you remember that story to tell?
I can.
Yeah.
They had one horse and one son, and all of their neighbors were lamenting about what bad, awful thing it was that they only had one horse, until the horse ran away, and, you know, then that was even worse. Oh, my gosh, you only had one horse. Now your horse is gone. What awful news. And the family said, maybe. And then a year later, the horse comes back and has a foal, you know, has birthed a colt. And they're like, well, you're so lucky now. What good news. Now you have, you know, really two horses. And the family said, maybe. And then their one and only son and one and only child gets up on the little colt and falls off and breaks his leg and kind of really ruins it, so he can't walk. And they come back to the family and they said, what a terrible event. You know, you had this one son and now he can't help you. He's got a bum leg. What awful news. And they said, maybe. And then 2 years later, the country went to war and the soldiers were going around knocking, recruiting all of the able-bodied young men. And they came to this house of this family, and of course they couldn't recruit this young man because he had a bum leg. And I like that story because I think it really does illustrate this second law that, you know, really, how do we see things? What is our perspective? Because situations are just situations. News is just news.
Yes.
But we put all these labels and meaning on it about whether it's really good or whether it's really bad. And, you know, sometimes it's our perceptions that get us into deeper difficulty.
Absolutely. We have this thing called the ego. I refer to it as the operating system. It's packed full of all of the things that we pick up from the time that our brain Well, I think we even began to get messages early on in the womb, perhaps. Certainly
I do too.
after
Oh,
the
I absolutely believe that we do.
but we get energy, we get messages. When we form words, we hear words, then we understand the meaning of those words, and we form messages. Those messages and words form into beliefs. We take all of that and we make stories. By the time we're, I don't know, 4 or 5 years old, we are packed so full of messages and stories about ourselves and about the world. And a lot of it comes, of course, as a result of the family that we're born into, but it's beyond that because we're also picking up those messages and beliefs and stories from the greater culture. And that becomes our operating system. And many of us aren't even aware that that's there and a part of this perceptual thing, right?
Right. And we sort of carry around these stories as though they're the absolute truth when
Yes.
they may be sort of a myth, and we end up kind of living our life by a story that maybe is outdated, and we don't let it go, and we can't move forward, and we stay stuck, and yeah.
And don't you think we do that? I don't want to get up on a soapbox here on talk radio, but don't don't we see don't we see that going on all around us? Don't Isn't that illustrated very well for us these days?
These days, yes.
we
These days.
These days, we're going to come back and we'll talk about we'll group a couple of these together. Law 3 and Law 4 go well together. Talking about Friday's laws. You can find the book at your favorite bookseller, Dr. Paul Friday. Sweet Sorrows author, Dr. Sherry Cormier, is our life strategist and co-host today here on Strategies for Living. Be right back.
When you're down so low, you cannot fall.
Welcome back. Welcome back into 1017 FM, 710 KEEL. Welcome back into Strategies for Living, marriage and family therapist David McMillan, Dr. Sherry Cormier, the author of Sweet Sorrow, Finding Enduring Wholeness After Loss and Grief, is my co-host and life strategist today. She and I are talking about Friday's Law. Okay, I'm going to make you earn your keep now, Sherry. Okay. All right. So we're gonna put some of these together and talk about them. So, we talked about Friday's laws. Life is difficult. Perception is reality. Let's talk about these next three kind of in a grouping, because I think they're all related. Change is the toughest thing a human being can do. You can never change another human being. You can only change yourself. When you change, they change, but you cannot change them. And I'm responsible for everything I do and say. I am not responsible for your response.
You know, I think these three, and I like that you grouped them together, David, because I think these three are the core. The core of Friday's laws.
Yeah.
They're the core of why we see clients. They're the core of what creates suffering for all of us in our life. They're the core of Friday's laws. They really spell it out. You know, change is, we know it's nobody likes change, right? You know, I don't know anyone that likes change.
Nor do I.
And yet when people are confronted with situations and it becomes apparent that they can't, they could keep doing things the way they've been doing them, and yet, you know, if they do, A or B or C is gonna happen. So, but so difficult. And I think, you know, if I had to pick, I was going to ask you if, like, there's one of these 8 laws, David, that you really resonate with. I really resonate with 5. Number 5, about I'm responsible for everything I say and do, but not for someone else's response.
You read my mind. You absolutely read my mind. And one of the things that I think is interesting is also the law that precedes it. Again, they kind of meld together for me.
Yeah, they do.
You can never change another human being. You can only change yourself. And once you change, they change. But you cannot change them. One of the things that Dr. Friday does is he brings in, and you and I know this very well, it's called Karpman's Triangle.
Yeah.
We also refer to it as the victim's triangle.
Yeah.
And it's been this has been particularly poignant for me personally over these last few years, to really understand how much, that I get pulled into this triangle, because I think we all get pulled into it.
Oh, I think we all do, personally and professionally.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, we live in basically Karpman's Triangle, or the drama triangle, or the victim's triangle. It's known by different things, but it basically says that that there's a triangle in it, and we get caught in it, kind of at an unconscious level, and the 3 points of the triangle are victim, rescuer, and persecutor. And if I'm going in and I see myself, I see you as the damsel in distress, and I ride in, on my white horse and pick you up, that may work for a little while, but then you're going to knock me off that dadgum horse because you never asked to be rescued, And so,
and I love what he says. I think this is so insightful of him, him being Dr. Friday, who wrote Friday's Laws, because we see this in working with people who come with people who are bereaved. Someone's bereaved, and you go to say something to them or be with them. He says, be careful about rescuing people. Because you can end up feeling like a victim. So you can shift, you can go in to rescue someone on your white horse. And we know a lot of people try to rescue bereaved people.
Right.
And it just doesn't work. And it's like it comes back at you, and, you shift over then into that victim point of that triangle you're talking about, David.
Right.
So it's so easy to want to rescue
It is, and
to fix, and to problem solve and troubleshoot
and many times when we do our own kind of analysis, when we do our own self-examination, and one of the things that I've had to come into into understanding is how much my ego gets involved. How much if I don't watch it, I can it can catch me very, very quickly, and before I know it, Sherry.
Mm-hmm. We all have that ego that and I think it's I think as we get older, we become more conscious of it, right?
Yes.
Of when it's kind of rearing its head up.
Law number 6 and 7, I think, are somewhat related also. The future and the past are seldom as good or as bad as we anticipate or remember, and no one has a squeaky clean psyche.
No one.
Well, but see, we treat certain people. I mean, I'm talking to Dr. Sherry Cormier today, who is an author of many textbooks and this wonderful new book, Sweet Sorrow. She is an expert. So certainly, she has a squeaky clean psyche.
At one point in this book, he mentioned something that his wife wrote. It actually made me wonder if maybe his wife came up with that one. Now remember, none of us are exempt. We all of us have our baggage.
Yes.
We all go, he talks about going to the station early in the book. We all end up at the station, which is a metaphor for death, really.
Yeah.
But we all end up there with a little bit of baggage. I don't escape. I don't have a squeaky clean psyche, and I'm guessing maybe he was saying he didn't either.
Exactly. Most definitely. It's obvious that from the beginning, in reading Dr. Friday's book, interviewing him, it was obvious that he certainly had read a book that impacted me so profoundly. Dr. Scott Peck's, M. Scott Peck's The Road Less Traveled. And he writes under the chapter, Nobody Has a Squeaky Clean Psyche, he says, in the 1978 classic, The Road Less Traveled, Dr. M. Scott Peck defined original sin as laziness. To me, he says, he made a revolutionary, insightful offering. It was the melding of classic psychiatry and a formal Christian concept. Original sin had been a religious foundation of guilt, the thought that all humans, even hardworking, successful humans, could always do more, and the idea that by doing whatever it is that we do is never enough was an awakening. Irrational guilt began to abate. Prior to reading Dr. Peck's discourse on guilt, I'd felt torn between either becoming an obsessive-compulsive Type A heart attack candidate or a laid-back Type B non-winning loser who doesn't work or try hard.
And it was what's interesting when I read that is at the time, and I know he didn't stay in this, but at the time, he saw that as his only. I'm only have those two choices. Right? And either or. I've got to be either a Type A or a Type B.
Yeah.
So he only saw two choices in front of him.
When you look at this, the future and the past are seldom as good or as bad as we anticipate or remember, and no one has a squeaky clean psyche. How many times when we're in the midst, Sherry, of our pain, of our suffering, how many times do we think, oh, it can't get, just can't get any worse?
And yet it often does.
And yet it often does. Or the other end of that, it doesn't get any better in this. And sometimes it does,
And sometimes it does.
And we need to remind ourselves at all points along the way about, these two laws, don't we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We do. And, just remembering, too, that life is sort of cyclical. And so, things can be bad one day, but because we're in impermanence and things are not fixed, doesn't mean that your entire life unfolding in front of you is going to be completely bad.
Yeah.
Things can be wonderful, and you can live a fairy tale like I did, and you've got to learn that also doesn't last forever.
Yeah, there's an ending to that story. One of my colleagues here says life is an irreconcilable phenomenon.
Yeah.
And I've added to that, none of us get out of here alive.
Yes.
Yeah. Dr. Sherry Cormier, author of Sweet Sorrow, our life strategist co-host today. We're talking about Dr. Paul Friday's Laws. Both of these books they belong on your bookshelf, folks. So we'll be back just a moment here on Strategies.
Times in our lives, we all have pain, we all have sorrow.
Now you're looking at a man that's getting kind of mad. I had a lot of luck, but it's all been bad. No matter how I struggle and strive, I'll never get out of this world alive. My fishing pole's broke, the creek is full of
I love it.
sand.
1017 FM and 710 KEEL. You got to love Reuben. Welcome back into Strategies for Living. And you had that, you had that loaded up.
Right. Yeah.
Before you had that song loaded up, before you knew.
That you were going to say that at the end of the segment.
That's amazing. Synchronicity, coincidence. I don't know. All right, so welcome back into Strategies for Living. Marriage and family therapist David McMillan, Reuben Wright, Dr. Sherry Cormier, the author of Sweet Sorrow. You got to get that book. We've been talking about Friday's Laws from Dr. Paul Friday. You got to get that book. We're to the last law very quickly. The only thing that lasts forever is now. I love a couple of quotes that he starts with. Tom Seaver, a former pitcher for the New York Mets, reportedly asked his manager, the great sage Yogi Berra, "Hey, Yogi, what time is it?" And Berra answered, "You mean now?"
I love that, too.
But then this one is so profound. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. What is time? The shadow on the dial, the striking of the clock, the running of the sand through the hourglass, day and night, summer and winter, month, years, centuries. These are but the arbitrary and outward signs, the measures of time itself. Time is the life of the soul.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Wow. And, I think that theme resonates throughout the entire Friday's Laws book, because early on when he gives that wonderfully moving story about going to the station, and he says, really life is not about the end point. It's about the journey.
Yes.
That's not the destination. It's the journey, the trip.
Yes.
And he talks about how both regret and fear rob us of time. They rob us of joy. They rob us of appreciating the journey. Regret and fear.
And that's
time robbers.
That's what we've got to grapple with. Sherry Cormier, thank you so much. I know you're going to come back many, 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 many times. So thank you for coming.
I'd love to.
Folks, you got to get Sweet Sorrow. Sherry Cormier, you got to get Friday's Laws, Paul Friday. Folks, thank you for tuning in to Strategies for Living. We've been brought to you by CADA, by Jerry Anderson State Farm Insurance, by Learning RX, by Highland Place Rehab and Nursing Center, by Jacob's Well Inspirational Books and Gifts, and by Resilient House. If today were the last day of your life, you only had one more phone call you could make, who would you call? And what would you say? And why are you waiting? Make the call. For Reuben Wright and for Dr. Sherry Cormier, I'm marriage and family therapist David McMillan. See you next time here on Strategies for Living.
Breaking news and trending talk. This is 101.7 FM and 710 KEEL. KEEL, Shreveport.